what is going on. Part three of this, I think it's a pretty hard article on the Armenian Genocide. Third, final part. Remember the last thing that we read? It was this guy, this despotic Turkish leader, wanted to show the Armenians that he meant business, box them on the ear. The first Armenian massacre. So this is like 20 years before our main article is 1915. So this is about 20 years before the first Armenian massacre. Between 1894 and 1896, this box on the ear took the form of a state-sanctioned assault on Armenians. So this is the government. It's coming from the government. In response to large upscale protests by Armenians, Turkish military officials, soldiers, and ordinary men sacked Armenian villages and cities and massacred their citizens. Hundreds of thousands of Armenians were murdered. So lots of people thought this was a good idea. Like they need to just get out of here, the Armenians. So it was the military, but also just regular, everyday people. The rise of the Young Turks. In 1908, a new government came into power, Turkey. Group of reformers who call themselves the Young Turks overthrew Sultan Abdul Hamid and established a more modern constitutional government. So modern, constitutional, less despotic, not so much like a dictator. This might be good news. At first, if you're Armenian, the Armenians were hopeful that they would have an equal place in this new state, but they soon learned that what the nationalistic Young Turks wanted most of all was to Turkify the empire. According to this way of thinking, non-Turks, especially Christian non-Turks, were a grave threat to the new state. World War I. In 1914, the Turks entered World War I on the side of Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. At the same time, Ottoman religious authorities declared jihad, or holy war, against all Christians except their allies. So, we could probably talk like a lot about this. We don't need to too much. But if you're living in Turkey, you're most likely you were Muslim. Unless you're Armenian, you're probably Christian. So basically, they're on the same side as Austro-Hungarians. That empire is no longer around, but very big empire in Europe and Germany. So if you kind of see that on a map, those nations are like largely Christian. Nowadays, they're probably more secular. We talked about that. Yeah, we talked about that in Bang. So not really religious at all, secular. So unless you're on our side and you're like, we just get rid of all Christians. So that's not unique to people who are Muslim. Remember the last genocide we talked about? It was in Bosnia. It was Christians trying to eliminate Muslims. So bad guys on every side of the religions there. Bad people, I should say. All right, Turkish military leaders soon began to argue that the Armenians were traitors. If they thought they could win independence, if they thought they could win independence, if the Allies were victorious, this argument went, the Armenians would be eager to fight for the enemy. And if you remember, this is exactly what happened in the United States with Japanese internment camps. They were not to be trusted, the government thought. As the war intensified, Armenians organized volunteer battalions to help the Russian army fight against the Turks in the Caucasus region. So actually they were trying to fight against their own government right there. We can imagine if they're not being treated fairly. These events and the general suspicion of the Turkish suspicion of the Armenian people led the Turkish government to push for the, quote, removal of the Armenians from the war zones along the Eastern Front. Oh, that sounds a lot like Japanese internment. Remember, western side of the United States, Seattle, San Francisco, some of the countries we heard, some of the cities we heard about, Japanese ancestors of Japanese American citizens who had Japanese ancestry were moved away from the potential war zones. Sounds familiar. Well, this is the part where the United States and Ottoman Empire, Turkish government doesn't follow. Genocide begins. On April 24th, 1915, the Armenian Genocide began. That day, the Turkish government arrested and executed several hundred Armenian intellectuals. So people who are smart, probably teachers, lawyers, that kind of stuff. After that, ordinary Armenians were turned out of their homes and sent on death marches through the Mesopotamian desert without food or water. Many of the marchers were stripped naked and forced to walk under the scorching sun until they dropped dead, while people who stopped to rest were shot. At the same time, the Young Turks created a special organization, which in turn organized killing squads or butcher battalions that were ordered to eliminate the empire's Christian elements. These killing squads were often made up of murderers and other ex-convicts. They drowned people in rivers, threw them off cliffs, crucified them, burned them alive. In short order, the Turkish countryside was littered with Armenian corpses. During this Turkification campaign, government squads also kidnapped children and converted them to Islam and gave them to Turkish families. Muslim families moved into the homes of deported Armenians and seized their property. In 1922, when the genocide was over, there were just 388,000 Armenians remaining in the Ottoman Empire. So about 1.5 million Armenians were killed. Today, the Armenian genocide today. Ever since then, the Turkish government has denied that a genocide took place. The Armenians were an enemy force. Well, we did hear earlier that they were actively helping Russians battle the Ottomans, but most of them were civilians. They were unarmed, women and children, that kind of stuff. And their elimination was a necessary war measure. Almost no non-Turkish historians believe this claim to be true. All right, so that is our look into the Armenian genocide, how it kind of closely relates to Japanese internment in this country up to a certain point. So there was no genocide when it came to people of Japanese ancestry in this country, but we did learn of several thousand who died in the internment camps, some due to old age, but also some due to just poor living conditions, not great medical care. All right, let me know if you have any questions. And of course, we have that Google form that you can work on. Let me know if you need any help. And the history scripts, I've only seen like a handful of those. So let me know if you need any help with your documentary for history.